Welcome to Meducated. In this short video, I'm going to walk you through how to study less and learn more. This is not just theory. I use this with my own paying students. Across thousands of hours of tutoring with this study plan, we've helped many students pass their boards, COMLEX and USMLE. This study strategy is designed to help you master the material, boost your attention, and avoid burnout. I've now decided to make this completely free because I don't believe there should be a monetary barrier between you and becoming a doctor. So let's dive right in and start rethinking how you study. Hi, I'm Dr. Jean-Marc Lucas. I'm the CEO and founder of Meducated. I founded Meducated because there really aren't that many test prep companies founded by DOs meant specifically for osteopathic med students, although we also work with allopathic students all the time. This image at the bottom of the screen is a screenshot from my real COMLEX Level 1 score report back when dinosaurs roamed the earth and USMLE Step 1 and COMLEX Level 1 were not pass-fail and they actually had a score. Through a stroke of pure dumb luck, I managed to nail 99th percentile on it, and I'm here to help you pass your boards now. The proof is in the pudding. This study plan, along with a little less than a month of tutoring, has gotten most of our students an average return of 70 points on their COMSAs. Students taking USMLE tend to see around a 15 to 20% increase in their score, which is massive, both of which can be absolutely game-changing. A wise man once said, study smarter, not harder. A lot of students tend to equate studying more with better results, and that's just not always true. My first recommendation for you is to take care of yourself while you're going through this process. This can be a very long and arduous process, and burnout is real. I personally burned out after my first year of med school and had the hardest time getting myself to study for Level 1 and Step 1. And honestly, I'm not really sure that there is a cure for burnout. I think we're all slowly heading in that direction. Try to fight it off now with some prophylaxis before you end up like me and seemingly every attending you see nowadays who is burnt out and wishing they could do anything else other than medicine. Let's start with some of the most common pitfalls that I see. The first thing I do when I meet a new student is I take a good history, just like you would when you see a patient. And the number one problem I see in almost every student that comes to me is not using active recall practice effectively. Well, what is active recall practice? It's when you have to actively try and remember something. Think of it like quizzing yourself. You can do it with flashcards. You can do it with your notes if you cover them up and then quiz yourself on it afterwards. The point is it's not just passively reading something or passively watching a video. You have to be actively trying to remember that material. A lot of people either do too much, too little, or aren't using it quite the way they should in combination with their other study resources. We'll talk about that more later. Another common pitfall I see is not practicing with testing conditions. Here's a super simple example. On test day, will you be answering questions in tutor mode or in timed mode? Sometimes tutor mode might make sense along the way if you're definitely not struggling with timing. But if you're struggling with timing, every question you should do should be in timed mode because that's what you're going to see on test day. Number 3 would be using too many resources. There are 1,000 resources available online and dozens of different test prep and tutoring companies. Don't let anybody fool you. There is no one correct way to study. Even the study plan I'm going to show you today doesn't work for everybody. And that's true of every study resource and of every study plan. What works for some people might not work for others. What I found to be most important, though, is picking a few that work well for you and staying consistent with them. That's where the adage comes from, trust the process. It's trusting that your studying over a prolonged period of time is going to pay off. And usually it will. Number 4 is failing to recognize burnout and testing anxiety. Like I said, mental health, believe it or not, is real. As a former ortho bro, I failed to recognize my own burnout while going through med school, and it really came back to bite me in the butt. Please make sure you have mental health on board while you're going through this, especially if you're going through a repeat attempt. If not psychiatry, at least get a therapist. Just having somebody to talk to can be extremely helpful. Plus, they can give you stress and anxiety management strategies that you can use along the way. So let's jump into our study plan. Here's our goal. Maximizing comprehension is number 1. If you don't understand the basic sciences, you're not going to make it through a lot of the questions on level 1. We can even extrapolate that to level 2 as well. Not understanding a lot of the basic science will come back to bite you on level 2 also. But that's a story for another day. Make sure you understand as much of the underlying pathophysiology as possible because you will be able to apply it to different questions with different scenarios in the future, as opposed to memorizing something with a flashcard. A flashcard is just one fact written in a single fashion. If you see that fact applied differently in a question, you might get it wrong. But if you understood that fact, then you'd be able to apply it to multiple different scenarios. Now we're going to move on to the apply phase. Take what you know and apply it in practice questions. On test day, the majority of your questions aren't going to be in the form of videos or podcasts or flashcards. They're all going to be practice questions. And practice questions are great because they show you the same material over and over again, but in different manners. When you get questions wrong, that's when we have the opportunity to retain. Take that information that you got wrong and learn it for good. Either put it in flashcards and or take the time to make sure it makes sense before you move on, right? Going back to our understand point. And lastly, we need to perform under pressure. Test day is always a little anxiety inducing. And that's why I recommended earlier that you practice with testing conditions. If you're preparing for COMLEX, you better be ready for 2 hours of work, a 10-minute break, 2 hours of work, and then a 30-minute break. And then you do it all over again. If you're preparing for USMLE, it's 1 hour on, a 5-minute break, and so on and so forth. Here's the first step. I prioritize all of my study plans around practice tests, and specifically the score report. Let's say you were to start tomorrow, day 1. That should be you taking the practice test. I also recommend trying to review some of it that same day if you can, because it'll help you the next day. Then on day 2, we ideally finish reviewing the practice test. For a lot of people, this is feasible, but for some people, that's just too much. So that's why I say if it goes into day 3, that's okay, but try not to let it go farther than that. Time is precious. After you've taken your test, look at your score report. This is incredibly valuable. We're going to write down 3 to 4 of our weakest sections based on weight, and we'll use this information when we get to our content review phase. For example, this is a real COMSAE score report. When we're talking about weighting, you can get a good idea of how much each discipline or system is weighted based off of the size of the confidence intervals. The larger the bar, most likely, the fewer the questions there were. So comparing endo to neuro and mental health here, neuro has a much smaller bar, which probably means there were more questions compared to endo. We can verify that by looking at NBOME's official blueprint. This is how much weighting is ascribed to each system across all 3 levels of COMLEX. And you'll notice right here, endo is only weighted about 5%. That's the minimum. 5% of the test is endocrine, whereas neuro and mental health is a minimum of 10%. So it makes sense what we said earlier, seeing those differences in the confidence intervals. Pay attention to the really big ones. MSK is a minimum of 13% of the exam. So for example, if your MSK was low and your endo was low, and I had to pick just one of those, I would go with MSK because it's worth almost 3 times as much as endo is. These are the blueprints from NBME's website describing how they weigh USMLE Step 1. NBME is nice enough to also give us the weighting for the disciplines. NBOME does not. And there are some minor differences. If you're taking both exams, make sure you look into these. Pay attention to the disciplines when you're going through these. Pathology alone can be up to 55% of the exam. If you combine that with physiology, we're talking about possibly 95% of the exam is just pathology and physiology. Those are super important topics, including pharmacology, micro, biochem, but things like genetics are much lower on the yield list. So if you were picking between pharmacology and genetics, please go with pharmacology. So now that we've taken a practice test and reviewed our weak topics from the score report, let's talk about how to review questions. This is all questions, not just practice test questions, but questions from question banks, anywhere you get them from. This is how I recommend reviewing questions. So we're going to start right here for the corrects. Ask yourself, did you get it right for the right reason? We need to be as efficient and thorough as possible. It's a careful balancing act. So to maximize efficiency, if you got a question right for the right reason, move on. That's it. That's all you needed. The correct answer is the main point of that question. That's what the question writer thought was high yield. Now let's say you guessed and got it right. If you guessed and got it right, just treat it like an incorrect question. And for our incorrects, go ahead and look at this 4-step process. First step is always the same, the educational objective. This is the main point. This is the TLDR, quickly summarized main point. By reading this first, it gives us an idea of what the question is about and what they wanted us to get out of the question. Second step, go ahead and look at the correct answer explanation. And if you picked something other than the correct answer, go ahead and also look at what you picked. If the correct answer was the main point, what you picked would be secondarily as important. I want you to make sure you understand what they wanted you to get out of the question, and then make sure you're not mixing up what you picked with the correct answer anymore. Step 3, categorize the question. After seeing thousands and thousands of questions, it's become pretty clear that there's really 2, maybe 3 types of questions. I want you to picture a spectrum. On one side of that spectrum, you've got these rote memorization questions, things you just need to memorize. And on the other side of the spectrum, you've got logic and comprehension questions. This is taking what you know and applying it in different ways to different scenarios. I'll give you examples of both in a bit. Categorizing the questions is really important because it helps you figure out how you're going to review the question, how you're going to learn from it. And lastly, step 4, if there were any other answer choices you just couldn't rule out, now's the time to just skim through them. But we're not spending a ton of time on these. We're not going and watching extra videos. We're not unsuspending extra flashcards. It's really just look at it briefly, make sure it makes sense, then move on. Here's our continuum. Like I said, this is really important because it's going to help us decide how we learn from these. On the left side, you've got your rote memorization question. It's a question asking about different types of chromosomal abnormalities. Maybe the actual question was just asking you to decipher which one of these answer choices was the Philadelphia chromosome. So the correct answer would be 922 in that case. And that's just something you have to memorize. Sure, you can understand the translocation process, but for this question, all you needed to know were the numbers 9 and 22. So to review these rote memorization questions, it's super simple. The best tool we have for that, in my opinion, is Anki. Anki is a flashcard app with an algorithm that shows you flashcards right before you forget them. So unlike physical flashcards, where you have to decide when you need to see those questions again, Anki will do all of that thought process for you. You just need to turn the app on every day and do your cards, whatever cards it shows you. And we have Anki and other pre-made decks, so you don't even need to make the cards most of the time. Sometimes it can be helpful to make your own, but the pre-made decks are super helpful for efficiency. So if you're going to unsuspend cards, I recommend a maximum of 3 cards per question because you need to do a little bit of both. You need to do some rote memorization practice, some active recall, and you need to do some application, some practice questions. But if you go beyond 3 cards per question, you will swiftly find yourself inundated in flashcards. Now, what cards should you unsuspend? Well, again, it's all based off of the main point. Get at least 1 card that answers the question. In this case, it could be a flashcard that relates the Philadelphia chromosome 922 to chronic myeloid leukemia. That's 1 card. What are you going to do with the others? Well, you don't always need extra cards. I would recommend, however, that you get at least 1 card on the answer choice that you picked as well, because I don't want you mixing those 2 answers up again. So if you pick choice E, 1114, you could get a card on whatever 1114 is related to, and you'd have your card on the Philadelphia chromosome. And that's just 2 cards. That might be all you need for that question. On the other side of the spectrum, you've got your logic and comprehension questions. These are your classic table questions with the up-down arrows. Now, it's not exclusively those types of questions, but those types of questions tend to be very logic and critical thinking based. In order to review these properly, make sure you thoroughly read the answer explanations. That should be step number 1. If the answer explanations are insufficient or don't quite get you all the way there, that's when you can start consulting third-party resources. And by that, I mean watching videos explaining the topics or even talking to AI. AI is such a fantastic tool. Just be careful, it's not always correct. If you decide to watch videos on the topic, I strongly recommend unsuspending additional flashcards because retention rates from watching a video passively are very low. But when you add flashcards, your retention rate soars. And lastly, for these logic comprehension questions, you can also consider hiring a tutor. My job as a tutor is not to make you memorize the Philadelphia chromosome. Instead, it's to help you understand the translocation process. But that's it. That's how you can review every question, be it from a question bank or from a practice test. Now, the next step in our study plan is to move on to our content review phase. I know the slide's a little dense, but bear with me. We're going to go through it one by one. Let's start on the right with our 3 points. There's only 3 things every day that you have to do. First things first, like I said, I recommend Anki. If you have other active recall methods that you prefer to do, you can do those. I just think Anki is the most effective. Make sure you do your active recall practice every day. And that's why I put it at the beginning of the study plan. Some people can do it later in the day, but you're less inclined to do it when you're tired. Anki or active recall practice should take you between 1 to 3 hours per day. If it's going longer than 3 hours, you might have too many cards unsuspended, or you've been studying for a very long time. I'm thinking months. Number 2 is a mixed question block. This is all systems, all disciplines. And like I said earlier in the presentation, I strongly recommend you do all practice questions timed. Taking and reviewing a question block for most students should be between 2 to 3 hours. It takes you about 1 hour to do the block and between 1 to 2 hours to review the block. If it's taking you much longer than that 3-hour period to take and review the blocks, you might be spending far too much time reviewing questions. But everybody's different and everybody learns at different paces. So what might be 2 hours for you could be 4 hours for somebody else. As long as you're able to get through this every day, you should be fine. Number 3 would be a focused question block. So these are question blocks of focused questions based off of the weak areas we picked out from our score report earlier on. Should be the same timing though, 2 to 3 hours to take and review. And again, I strongly recommend you do it all timed. If you don't have any trouble with timing, this is where you might consider doing a tutor mode block so you get that instant feedback and can learn right away and hopefully even see your score rise throughout the block. However, I would still prioritize time blocks over anything else. Now let's go ahead and look at the left side of the screen. This study plan on average takes people between 8 to 10 hours. I know that doesn't quite add up with the hours we have on the screen here, but this is planning in breaks as well. I recommend taking a practice test every 1 to 2 weeks. Whenever you run out of your focus blocks to do, once you've gone through your entire weaknesses list, go ahead and take a new practice test. Then you'll generate a new weaknesses list and start the process all over again. And like I said earlier on, I strongly recommend using test day timing to plan in your breaks. Think of it like a Pomodoro technique. If you're taking COMLEX, you study for 2 hours, then you take a 10-minute break and you repeat that process throughout the day. Once you've gotten your 4 blocks in, you've just taken an entire COMLEX exam. And you probably finished much sooner than you would have otherwise. If you're taking USMLE, try 1 hour on and a 5-minute break and repeat. This can be hard to maintain for months at a time, but I recommend switching over to test day timing at least 2 weeks in advance. And please make sure you're waking up in time for the test. Your test starts at 8 a.m. Make sure you're up and at your desk ready to study by 8 a.m. at the latest, 2 weeks before your exam. Lastly, we've got some optional features here. Some people are really quick and can breeze through this entire study plan much quicker than others. I find the majority of students cannot do that, but if that's you and you're really fast, consider these optional additions. The first one would be to review the new cards that you unsuspended throughout the day. That'll just save you some time tomorrow when you would have to do them anyways. Number 2 is to watch content review videos on some of your weak areas. But like we said earlier, if you're watching videos, try to get some extra Anki on those too. But I always recommend capping the Anki so you're not drowning in it. Please note, I didn't say do a 3rd block of questions. For some students, that's fine if they're particularly quick, but at the end of the day, if you're tired, you're not going to want to do a 3rd block, or you're not going to do it very well and not going to review it as effectively. So that's why I put in these slightly easier versions of things you can do at the end of the day. On the left side of the screen, we've got an example daily schedule. I've even included COMLEX day timing so that your work periods are in 2-hour increments. I did not include test day breaks because, like I said, that's hard to maintain in the long term. So if you're starting off in the early morning at 8 a.m., get your active recall done first. Let's say we go through 2 hours of that. We just finish in time. If you want to simulate test day, take just a 10-minute break and get started studying again. Otherwise, give yourself a little longer of a break, say 30 minutes, and get started up again at 10:30 a.m. Now you can do your mixed block or your focus block. It doesn't matter the order. As long as the mixed block is all systems, all disciplines, and timed. You'll review at the end, unsuspending Anki, watching videos, talking to your best friend ChatGPT, whatever you have to do. If we're simulating testing conditions, now you give yourself a 30-minute break. But here I didn't. I gave you an hour break. So let's say we start up again at 1:30 p.m. Now we're doing our focus block. Still timed, but now we're focusing it based off of our weak areas. Let's say one of our weak areas was micro. So we'll do 40 or 44 questions of just micro. Then the late afternoon session is essentially a catch-up period. If you didn't finish any of your blocks from earlier in the day, this is where we finish it all off. And that's an entire 4-block COMLEX exam. You can be done at 6 p.m. I know that sounds crazy to some people, but trust me, mental health is real. You need at least an hour or 2 every day to prevent burnout. Please do not wake up and start studying immediately, then go to bed still studying. Plan in time for yourself at some point during the day. On the right-hand side of the screen, we've got an example of how you can convert your score report weak areas to focused blocks. Let's say that first line there, micro, cardio, respiratory, MSK, and OMM. Those are your weak areas. Sure, you could have 5 different focus blocks that you need to do, but how do you know how many blocks you need to do? And when you do an MSK block, well, guess what? You already know it's an MSK question, so you're more inclined to pick the MSK option. So I'm going to teach you how to pick the number of blocks and how to make combination blocks, so hopefully the answers aren't quite as obvious. So if we're starting with micro and it's just micro, your farm is great, then just do a micro block. If you had farm as well, do a combination block because there's a ton of overlap. You could do micro and farm 40 questions or 44 questions. When you're picking the number of blocks you should do, for disciplines, I generally choose between 3 to 4 focus blocks in total. That's not per day, that's just in total. For systems, I typically choose between 2 to 4 blocks. So micro, it's just micro, so let's do between 3 to 4 blocks. If you do your third block and you feel great, cool, move on to the next one. But if you do your third block and still think, yeah, I really need more practice, go ahead and do that fourth block. Next up, I've taken our cardio number 2 and respiratory number 3 and combined them. Again, this is to help reduce the likelihood that you know the answer just because you know what system you're working on. For cardio resp, let's choose somewhere between 2 to 4 blocks. I went with 2 to 3. It really depends on how low your bar is on your actual score report. Next up, we have MSK and OMM. Those two categories are essentially the same thing. And I can almost guarantee you, if your MSK section is low, your OMM section is probably low, and vice versa. I strongly recommend always combining these two sections. Now that we're combining a discipline with a system, I tend to go on the high end, let's say 3 to 4 blocks of this. Also, because these are very highly weighted sections. MSK alone is at least 13% of the test. And lastly, please give yourself, for burnout prophylaxis, like we mentioned earlier, dedicate a little time to yourself every day, 1 to 2 hours, and I strongly recommend that you take 1 day off per week because laundry and dishes are not going to wash themselves. Here's what this looks like on a weekly schedule. So we've got our weaknesses at the top. So this table is broken down from top to bottom from weeks 1 through 3 and from left to right, Monday through Sunday. You probably already noticed there's not a lot of things that are changing about the schedule. Every day starts with Anki, the next step is a mix block, and the third step is a focus block. We're just working our way through our weaknesses. So the first 4 days are working through 4 blocks of micro. Then we do a couple blocks of cardiorespiratory before we hit the 7th day, and that's where I say take a day off. You deserve it. I still recommend doing your Anki on your day off because it just keeps accumulating. Anki does not care about your mental health. Sorry to say. But if you keep following this schedule through week 2, you'll notice we eventually switch into our MSK OMM focus blocks. We do 4 of those and then we're done. Since we're finished and it was almost time for us to take a rest day anyways, we'll go ahead and take a rest day 1 day early, still doing our Anki. And then on Sunday, that's where we take a new practice test. If you can, try to also get your Anki in after the practice test and review the first block. I know it's a tall order, but it will save you time in the coming days. If you can't do it, it's not a big deal. Just work on it over the next couple days. So the day following the practice test, finish reviewing the remainder of the test and get through your Anki. You're not doing additional mixed and focus blocks on test day and test review days. Now, once you've finished reviewing the test, the rest is based on that practice test score report. So I can't fill in the rest of the chart without knowing how you did and picking out new weak areas. But that's it. That's the entire study plan. We broke it down into a daily schedule and a weekly schedule. And I know it's fairly simple. You might be wondering, what do I do with content review? You're doing your content review as you go through your practice questions, as you review them. You watch videos as needed. You talk to ChatGPT as needed. You do flashcards constantly. Your content review is built in to the schedule. The most important things are doing your daily active recall practice and seeing the same material over and over again, written in different ways and different questions. So let's say you try this plan out for a few weeks and your score stagnates. This does happen. It doesn't happen very often, but it can happen. A couple steps you can take are: number 1, mental health is real. You very well could be burnt out or depressed or anxious. Talk to a therapist, talk to a psychiatrist, get help. Number 2, you might not be prioritizing comprehension over memorization. It's very easy to memorize your way through things you don't understand. It is hard to take the time and make sure it makes sense. If you're struggling to pass your practice tests, it might be because you memorized your way through a lot of med school. And now that's coming back to bite you in the butt when you're seeing the same material in different ways. So if something doesn't make sense now, make sure it makes sense before you move on. So this is where we might need to do a little additional content review. Lastly, consider hiring professional help. It doesn't have to be pre-Meducated. Anybody with thousands of hours of experience is going to know a ton about test prep and might be able to troubleshoot your situation in ways you could not have even conceived. But like I said, a score stagnating after using this program is rare. The vast majority of people will be fine with just this, just 3 things every day. Trust the process. But that's it. Thank you so much for watching our study plan video. We have some gifts for you here if you made it all the way to the end. The QR code on the left will take you to our free pre-test self-assessment. It's an 88 or 80 question self-assessment that focuses on pathophysiology comprehension. There's not a ton of rote memorization topics in there. There's not much biochem, micro, or pharm. This is where you'll find the up and down arrow table questions. This is how you test your comprehension, and it's totally free. After taking it, you'll get a percentile ranking that shows you how you did compared to your peers nationally. For the QR code on the right, that'll take you to our free community Discord where you can ask us your questions. I'm in there personally. We'll have other tutors in there as well, and you're welcome to ask any questions you like. We do not gatekeep knowledge. We are happy to help for free. You're also welcome to email me personally at contact@premeducated.com. Thanks again for watching, and feel free to join our Discord if you have any questions.